Well, thank you all, and thank you, Fatherlanders, who made the production of that film possible. If I could invite the panelists to now unmute and to um, come on screen, so we can have the discussion. And I want to start by um, reminding us that here, 2026, this is the 126th year of Nigeria's birth, 1900, and here we are in 2026. So 126 years on, 66th year of independence we're entering, the 56th year post-war, post the end of the so-called Civil War, the Biafra War. Uh, can you see the Nigerian nation in view yet? If I could ask Stephen Kefas to start us off, can you see, is it in view, this Nigerian nation as we're in this 126th year of its creation, 66th year of its grant of independence from Britain, 56th year post the end of the Biafra War? Stephen, if you could unmute
Thank
yourself.
you.
Yes.
Thank you so much. Thank you. In fact, at some point, I got so emotional seeing the film. It well captures our reality. And like I've said in different fora before now, I think to be sincere, no matter how objective you want to be, I must say that Nigeria has not experienced any form of growth in the real sense of the word growth. Whether you look at independence, whether you look at post-Biafran war, or whether you want to go back to the so-called amalgamation and all that. So, and that tells me as a person that something is fundamentally wrong, you know. So, and I've come to this conclusion that no matter what we do, if we don't revisit the very foundation, in fact, even if you bring some of the best leaders in the world to lead Nigeria, I don't think we're going to achieve so much because there is a fundamental problem that we've ignored for so many years. So I believe that with a project like this, like what we've seen now, in fact, as I was seeing the film, I was thinking and telling myself, oh, how do I get this film in my local language or in the Baju language or in the Achab language?
Okay, I was about to ask you, what's your local language?
So I am Ham, but they call us Jaba, but I am Ham that's my ethnic group.
Mm.
The Ham people are in Jaba local government area of Kaduna State. So I am already asking myself these questions: that how do I get this film to the local languages in Southern Kaduna where I come from? Because this film is so important. And one thing, they've so made us to believe in a lie, and the lie has now become our truth, our common truth as a people. 2 weeks ago or thereabout, I read a story about Katagum. Katagum is a warrior in Kagoro, Southern Kaduna. If you go to Kagoro today, there are hills, there are caves. And when I read about that man, I discovered that he was a warrior who fought even the colonial masters when they came. He was so brave. But nobody is talking about him. You won't see it in any textbook.
Mm.
And in fact, there's a descendant of that man, I think one of his great-great-grandchildren who is alive. He's like the tallest man in Kaduna State today. And when you look at that boy, you could tell that he's a descendant of giant. I mean, he's the tallest person in Kaduna State today. But you won't get to see this in any of the historical books. So we've been told too many lies. We've been told that we don't have histories. We've been told so many things, and we've believed them. So I believe that this project is a very good starting point, especially if we can get it localized, if we can get it, into various forms that will really sink deep. Even the Hausa man from Katsina, for instance. I'm sure he'll be interested.
Mm.
The only people who have problems with projects like this are people who themselves do not have roots in Nigeria,
Mm.
meaning they are also aliens. They came from elsewhere. 3 weeks ago, I was in Abuja. I had a conversation with a historian who is the former minister of the Federation, and he was telling me about the Hausa land, for instance. He said the Hausa land of Katsina and Zaria had Islam for 400 years, even before the jihad. And I was wondering, I said, if they were already practicing Islam in Hausa land, what was the essence of the jihad?
I
Because
think what they said was that they were not pure, they were not practicing pure
exactly.
Islam.
Exactly. So these are some of the issues. So I think conversation like this need to be localized
Mm.
beyond those of us that have the opportunity to be on Zoom and see these films. We need to take it down to the grassroots. So it's a movement that I don't know, of course, it's going to involve so much resources, but it's a movement that if we must be intentional, and maybe we need to begin to talk to other people who have the resources and would key into this project so that we can really push this far. I see this as an important, in fact, is the best thing. This is the best thing we should be talking about now, and not the 2027 election, because that election, it won't change anything. If you bring a
Mm.
Donald Trump or Putin or the guys that are ruling in the United Arab Emirates to come and lead Nigeria, they will fail because there's a fundamental problem that is yet to be addressed. So I will yield the mic now, and then I'm sure as
Uh,
the conversation.
yeah, thank you very much, Stephen, for those opening comments. Zariyi, if I could ask you to come in on the back of Stephen's comments. What is your perspective? 126 years post creation, 66 years post independence, 56 years post the end of the Biafra War. Can you see the Nigerian nation in view in your telescope?
Well, to be honest with you, first of all, let me start with the last question or with the last word, one of the last words, nation.
Yes.
Nigeria is the farthest whatever a nation could be referred to by definition. Somebody said to me, is it possible that all these problems are going to finish, to come to an end? And I said, no, it is not possible. They will not come to an end because we are not even a structure that could be enhanced. We are not in a situation where you have anything to improve. On the one end, you've got people who have learned to live together, people who have learned to integrate. On the other hand, you've got people who believe everybody has to submit to something, submit to an ideology. And it seems while people from one part of the country are looking at how do we get to this point, how we get to that point, another one is looking at how much blood he has to spill to sustain a barbaric lifestyle that most part of the world has let go of hundreds, of years ago, centuries, or possibly millennia ago. Now, I looked at the movie and I said to myself, indeed, that is the only way out of this. I have had arguments such as, well, for instance, what Gawan advanced when Biafra, just prior to the Biafran War, before he engaged militarily with Biafra, he'd say, if it broke away, we would only become smaller pieces of nations, and then the bigger ones will just ride over every small piece and all of that. But then I asked myself, well, I don't know, I've not looked at the details, but somebody would tell me that you could pick the entirety of France and hide it inside Zambisa forest. And I wouldn't argue with that. You look at Greenland, you look at big nations. I mean, Nigeria, when you look at it population-wise, you realize that it is let me give this example. There is a tendency of us to think we are primitive. And we are primitive in the sense that the Jabba man is saying, well, if the governorship is coming to Southern Kaduna or the senatorial seat is coming to southern Kaduna, I should be the one on the ticket. And the Bajuman is saying I should be the one on the ticket. And somebody says, well, these people behave like primitive human beings and all of that. But I've asked them, and I said to them, what would you make of a country where the English, the French, the Spanish, and the Germans were forged into one country? Do you think, even with their level of sophistication, with their technology, the German will not have a problem if a French guy is trying to run for the second time in office after being off power for possibly the past 15 years? Do you think the Englishman would be comfortable with an Italian representing him as? So there are a whole lot of things that I think you mentioned that they foresaw that, and they built states where, regardless of their differences, there's a commonality they share of history, of culture, of lifestyle, of wars, of conquest, of defending themselves, and all. So they come from a certain history where I think the only ethnic nationality in Nigeria that is close to that would be the South Western Yoruba nation, basically. And that is the reason why I think, I don't pray for it, but should anything happen to whatever this amalgam called Nigeria is, the most likely region that would survive with the least of effects or the negative impacts of it would be the southwestern part of the country, because they haven't lost that nationhood to a large extent. It's not exactly like that in the southeast. And then the middle belt at some point was completely shut long before we began documenting our history. The caliphate historians basically dictated how we were seen by the outside world. So most of the people that will tell you they're expert in the history of the middle belt, when you ask them, their references always come from the caliphate historian. So I think that is just the only way Nigeria, if it has to, thrive as an entity, a single entity. I think the orange arrangement is basically what's needed. Otherwise, nothing is going to happen. Basically, from what I see, nothing is going to change to the best.
What would you say to those who would argue that we're all being too impatient, that these things take time, and we're just looking for microwave solutions, the quick cook, and that if we persevere, we will get there? What would you say to them?
It's a lie. It's deceit. It's false. Although people love to make reference to the fact that the US, Britain, Germany, Rome, whatsoever, they didn't just start overnight. It took years and years. But when you go through that history, you discover that the phases they achieved is phase as a people together. You can't say that of a nation where you pay tax, you educate your children, you are responsible for any damage they would do in school, you pay for it. You want to drive a better car, you work harder. You want to live in a better house, you work harder. And then somebody lives a desert. Of course, he doesn't want to integrate into modern life, but he employs modern tools, modern weapons to rape women and kill people. And what he wants is you cede your land so that he advances that archaic lifestyle in the same country. And then you have a man who has traveled around the world and is educated and is sitting at a high position, and he is proposing that you yield to that archaic lifestyle, basically by allowing somebody that does not have a history with your own people to come in and basically just live on your own commonwealth. So in your village, you pay your rent. You want to own a larger farm, you will have to either buy or you take it on lease and all of that. But somebody just comes because he knows how to kill people, and he believes that his old lifestyle is something he should hold on to. And then they need your land free of charge, and they need your resources free of charge to sustain him. When you have a country like that, you can't say we have to be patient with anything, because the seed that we are seeing is such that would either birth a civil war or will destroy the already existing infrastructure that we have. So what I would say to them is we should snap out of that deceit. The Americans grew over time. It wasn't exactly as if they were a perfect democracy initially. But whatever wars they fought kept bringing them close to being a nation. In the case of Nigeria, it keeps splitting us apart. It keeps splitting us apart in the line of religion, in the line of ethnicity. And primarily, whereas I mean, I don't hope to sound I don't hope to
The doommonger
to
is what they will accuse you of.
but it does look like there are certain groups that have a tendency of blending together to thrive better. And there are certain groups that will never allow that to happen. We can't deceive ourselves. We know what part of the country drags us back. We know what part of the country makes it impossible for Nigeria to have a common identity. So if that has failed to work, then we would have to revert back to our nation states, to our ethnic nationalities, to now look at how we could blend with each other in that regard, where virtually every nation is responsible for itself. And then we deal with each other based on a certain understanding of who we are, rather than this forgery that has failed over and over and over and will continue failing.
Thanks very much for those comments, Zariyi. Stay tuned, stay online. And Ade, you're seeing the film for the first time. And it was said that it's your nation that stands the best prospects if Nigeria was to disappear off the horizon. What is your response to the film? What is your response to the comments that you've heard so far?
First of all, good evening, good morning to all, wherever you are. Happy New Year to you all. And the first thing that struck me was the question you asked, Nigeria as a nation, 56, 66 years, what do people feel? I think it depends on which side of the experiment you sit on. So for those who set up the experiment, it has been very successful, very, very successful. If you define a nation as a in the context of this modern fiction, where it's simply defined by a colonial state, then Nigeria has been very, very successful. And a lot of people would argue that it has been very, very successful. If, however, you were to define a nation as a people with shared civilization memories, cultural logic, and moral imagination, then Nigeria has failed. Because it has none of that. It literally has no soul. And that's why I said it depends on which side of the fence you sit. And I think a problem with a lot of us is that we are part of the experiment. And if you're in the matrix, so to speak, then it's very difficult to understand that you're in an experiment and that this experiment is a disaster. And you would believe that, yes, if you give it time, that things will be fixed and things will work out. And that's not going to happen. The experiment is deliberately designed to repeat itself and fail, and it's failing. And that's a good outcome for those who set it up. And I think what the movie has done is try to highlight to those of us in the experiment and those of us who are fortunate enough to take a step back and look back into what is Nigeria today to understand that it's a complete failure. The Southwest may well be a nation that can survive if Nigeria were to disintegrate, allegedly. I think what people seems to forget or miss is that the Yoruba nation itself is, while there's a lot of cultural unification in terms of language, etc., also has its own isms. And those fractures may itself become prominent if and when Nigeria were to split. Perhaps much easier to heal than some of the other nations. What would we do with the Yorubas as a nation in other countries, in Africa? As those are questions that I think we need to ask ourselves. I think one of the things that the Orange Union does for us is create that awareness. Makes us think a little bit about, as the movie title of the movie, our identity as Africans, assuming there's an African identity, and our identity as nations, our nationhood. And for that, we need to think a little bit differently in terms of a nation identity being what I would say a living political, cultural, and civilization consciousness, where we feel that we share a common understanding of love, togetherness, and principles, where the rules are clearly understood in terms of language, culture, etc., that unify us as a people. So I would say kudos. It's the first time I've seen the movie, but quite thought provoking. I think for a lot of those still in the experiment, when they see it, it would make them think. Some of the brilliant things which I noted, the foreign names, why do we bear Suzanne, for God's sake, But then we've also got to understand the concept of religion in this experiment, While we say in Yoruba land, religion is your personal cross, it's up to you, whatever religion, whatever form of God you want to believe in. But I rarely come across a Yoruba person who is also not a traditionalist, traditional religion. Doesn't matter whether it's the pastor or whatever. They still understand and believe in our traditional gods. In fact, we fear them more than we fear the Bible and the Quran. So that should tell us something about what I call our real national identity and our definition of a nation. So kudos to the team for such a brilliant production.
Yeah, thanks very much indeed,
Yeah,
Dele, for your
yeah,
comments. And it's
yeah,
worrying especially you as an engineer,
yeah, yeah,
telling us that Nigeria has failed, the experiment has failed.
yeah,
It's those lawyers out there who are still singing its praises. When an
yeah.
engineer looks at a design and
Mhm,
says the experiment has failed, we should be concerned. Tim, uh, you're not an engineer, you're a finance
mhm.
man, an entrepreneur. Um, what is your perspective on what you've heard so far? And I know you've seen the film before, you were there at the premiere in London. But each time we see these things, we see something different. So give us your take on the thing.
Yeah, thank you, Dele. And as you were speaking, I didn't think my name was going to be the next one because Ade just got me hooked into his thought process, and I was just following it. I just didn't want it to stop because, and this is what I get from what I find in watching this film, or more importantly, listening to people who watch it, is that every individual brings a perspective to it that continue to represent the diversity even within our own selves. So when they put the lenses they give you, it's a lens that it's just awesome. So I could listen to as many people here, and you see that each person gives you a lens, and all of those lenses are what sort of makes this particular film that allows people to put their lens on. Like when Yusuf was speaking, you could see Yusuf's lens on it, and you could see, and it allowed him to enter into a whole set of the background history information that I wouldn't have known about what happens in the southern Kaduna area, who's who fought who. So the film gave the opportunity for that lens to be seen. When Stephen was speaking, you could see the lens as well. And so from my perspective, um, coming from the southeast, and not just southeast, I'm an Arab first, Arab who have our own encounter and experience of a whole sovereign, British sovereign, had to fight us in 1901 to defeat our nation. And when you read their report on the outcome of that war, what you get is they were able to even explain to me how big our nation was. That it wasn't just where we see out the southeast. It went all the way to Equatorial Guinea. And that
And
was
that was
nation,
Arrow Nation
Arrow
within
Nation.
the
Yeah,
Igbo nation.
yes,
Yeah.
yes.
Yes,
So
just to
Arrow
be
Nation.
clear.
So it's called Arrow Confederacy. So they described it
Mm.
that we destroyed a country. So they actually knew it was a country that they fought in 1901. And so I never, when we talk about what they've done to us, and when we say this movie tells us how to go back to our various, these were countries. It's like somebody conquering Britain today, and there is no longer Britain. It's like somebody destroying the 27 countries we know today by their name, and they vanish. And 100 years down the line, nobody ever knew there was a country called Britain or France. That's so when I saw their report, I got more angry that we weren't talking about loose countries. These were formed countries, formed government, ran their affairs, and they were destroyed. So and and it's so recent in history terms that we, even our own generation, that some of us are just over 60 now, right? Have no idea was just something so new. So history terms, less than 140 years. We have no understanding that we were 140 years ago, we weren't Nigeria. So what this is telling me is that the more the intelligentsia community of Nigeria first, and I like what Ade you were saying, the more the intelligentsia community, and he described those part of the experiment. I think what we probably need to do is to make sure as many of the intelligentsia community of Nigeria reason with this, because Nigeria is one of those communities where, if you look at it, we may be 220 million, but I can tell you now, in every state, you don't normally have 1,000 people that control all the affairs of the state, including fellowship. So it tells me that if we're 37 states and you go 1,000 each state, the whole 220 million like follows. It happens in an election. People will tell you that a goat can rule Nigeria. And if you doubt it, all you need to do is to get the people that control every other person. Once they're with you, a goat will become the president of Nigeria. So what this film is reminding me, the importance of, first of all, us knowing our history very well. I think Dele was you that once made the reference that Churchill once said, "The further back you go, the clearer the future or
Yes. The
it
further
is."
back you look,
Yes,
the further ahead you can see.
correct. So, and if we all take this movie as what in a snapshot, 30 minutes, helps us to immediately go as far back as possible, then that may be a tool that what I think it was Stephen that was saying how we can get this localized immediately. And I agree with that. But we have to look at segments because the more intelligentsia community of Nigeria gets into it. I mean, I did just looked at it and he just come up with some ideas, more or less, was able to do a self-evaluation that is fair, is reasonable, is rational. And if as many of us can get it, it will help us. But specifically on the Igbo community, there is something I happen to have the uncomfortable privilege of knowing a little bit more than an average Nigerian on the Biafran War, just for the purposes of the role my father played in the central, and so and the access of information I have. And every time I look at it and see the records and I look at it, there is nothing Biafra would have done to avoid Biafran War.
Mm.
Even if it never happened in 90, it could have happened by now, right? So And he tells me, and it was out completely outside our hands because external forces wanted something like this to happen.
Yes.
I didn't understand, but it needed to happen. It was far beyond happening to Igbos. It was more almost a lesson to every Nigerian, or indeed every African, that you dare not try, challenge a situation. So when you look at it, you could look at it as Igbos are the experiment. But to be honest, and I've investigated this, I realized that part of the experiment of the Igbos of the Biafran War, especially the role of the external force, was to teach almost every African community or disorganized nations never, ever try it. Look at what happened in Biafra. And so that's part of my, so I look at it as, unfortunately, we became the guinea pig, and it frightened many people. That's why you can't even think of many African nations ever thinking, because you reminded what happened in Biafra, and Nigeria obviously consolidated. So the Biafran experiment is something I will say to people when you look back and look at what is happening in Nigeria now. So look at the Middle Belt. Look at what's happening in the Middle Belt. If you look at what's happening to them, it could have called it Biafra. So what's happening in Biafran experiment becomes something that anybody who dares to say, I just need to be treated fairly, you've already upset the system. You've already
Yeah,
upset the system.
powerful,
Yeah,
powerful.
yeah.
Just very quickly, I mean, 56 years on from the end of the war, is Nigeria feeling like, has it got that family feeling for the Igbo people, your people? Because family is a smaller scale of nation. So if we're seeing the Igbos as one of the 371 and Nigeria as the family, is it feeling more or less as a family?
So I've always said to people who talk about Biafra, I said, look, whether we like it or not, an average Igbo person sees Biafra its political nation. They don't have to be IPOB, by the way, or not. So the concept of Biafra becomes a political country to your head. And if you then understand it, you're understanding the politics of Nigeria. It's very difficult to, but an average Igbo person sees what happened in the war as a way to understand the politics of Nigeria. Now, inside that, so that became unfortunately a unifying force, or fortunately, but inside the Igbo nation, you find that while there may be still like differences, what is very common is what you might call the rules of the game, the egalitarian and the so-called the democratic style of the nation itself. So there are things that are very specific, and there are things that are, so what are specific is what still keeps them separate, but the common ways of how they govern themselves is what makes them a nation. They all agree in some order. And so from that answer of as a family, yes, we are very much aware of the treasury. My son, who's in Nigeria, just telling me how he just walked into a family home and saw a little baby. They invited him, and he saw a little baby, and he realized he's made in England, right? He realized when he was leaving the house that if you see a baby, you must give some whatever cash you have in your pocket, you give it. So the evil man that he went to his house never thought that they made in England. So my son said, I was just living out, and I realized, shit, I've just seen this little boy, this baby. So he said, I put my hand in my pocket, all my naira. The old man turned around and said, oh my God, you know this tradition about Igbo. And he said, yeah. So to the man that is 66 years old, meeting a 32-year-old, he couldn't have. My son said, if I didn't do it, he won't tell me anything. But as soon as I did it, he told me that this is Igbo thing. So the point being that there are common codes that are there that make these nations very unique and have their identity. And that's what the family side of it is. Other aspects is what brings the division. Dele, just one other point. It was an Igbo young man, whom you know very well. I think it's actually Onyekachi that said to me that Igbos and Yorubas, that first he said, if Igbos understand that Yorubas not just preserved African culture in Nigeria, not just preserve African culture in Africa, they preserved African culture globally. That there's no nation, black nation on earth, that has a footprint of preserving nation. That's why when Yusuf was alluding that they could well survive, I understand that. And Yunikachi said to me, Tim, well, we Igbos haven't actually looked at that. If we worked together and look at the cultures that make these nations, the Yorubas, and he said, we should be all able to organize ourselves sufficient enough, not just the Nigerian side, but to promote the idea of African culture so that every single nation in Nigeria, in particular, the 371, will find a way, a platform for the world to see their culture globally. So I thought I say this because there is something about Orange Union, and there is something about this nation of Orange Union, which the film does, that allows us, all of us, to see beyond Nigeria. This is about Africa. This is about Black nation. This is about our diasporans in Caribbean countries and about our diasporans in America. That unless we unlock this, we'll never forge that link. So I'll have to shut up now.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Tim.
Right.
Now, I want to bring Gabriel in, who's the architect of the mischief of the film, who produced the film. Is a man who wears many hats, but as he's unmuting himself and getting himself ready, once Gabriel finishes his comments, I want Bonny to run a very short film. It's about 4 minutes in length. It's the 200 and this year is the 250th anniversary of American independence from Britain. And that short film has, it will help us to frame our discussion in terms of, is this Nigerian nation in view? We're using a telescope, the most powerful, to say, can we see this Nigerian nation in prospect? But let's hear from Gabriel first. Gabriel, over to you. Gabriel wears many hats, a surgeon, poet. He has an Igbo dimension and he has an Ijaw dimension as well. So we've got full spectrum coverage here. Over to you, Gabriel.
Thank you, Dele. I hope I can be heard.
Yes, we can hear you.
So, I mean, yeah, it's good to watch that film. Every time you watch it, it's amazing. You see certain aspects which you might not have reflected on either retrospectively or prospectively. So, I mean, what is Nigeria doing as time has gone on? 125 years, 126 now, and also looking at the independence, looking at the wars. Well, yeah, I think we all agree it's not doing anything that's worth commending for obvious reasons. It's just not doing anything. If anything, it's only doing things you just have to be ashamed of as an African. The film obviously talks about African identity, trying to give respect to each and every African ancestry, and looking for a way to showcase Africa in all its different shades on the international platform. I mean, just like the world is very ignorant about Africa, we Africans, to a large extent, We don't know much about the depths of Africa. I mean, we're learning about our own sort of ethnic nation as much as we can, and even at that, I don't think we're doing a great job for obvious reasons, for the colonial, wedging and impediments. So Nigeria it's not helping us understand our Africanness, for starters. But then because it's designed to basically stop us from knowing where we're heading. I mean, I look at one issue, which is the issue of structural racism. And it goes back to everything we're saying. It was designed to be managed by external factors. And if you study their history, the Western Europeans, you'd understand they design things and manage it. And therefore, even if they say you've got your independence, unfortunately, once they design something, they hold on to it. So, I mean, the French are a bit more blatant, but it's not very different from the English. And once the Americans show themselves, it's not too different either. So this is where I think we Africans are not understanding. One of the things the film's trying to tell us is to get yourself out of the creation of Western Europeans. You have to own your own identity. It's very difficult to shape the identity that Western Europeans are creating for you. It's very difficult. I mean, we're not the masters of that setup. In fact, when they planned all this stuff at the Berlin conference, none of us, we weren't there. No African was there. So we don't even have a clue of what they were designing, what they were planning. So everything they've done, obviously, is to, as much as possible, wipe off our identity. They're working hard on that because they know if your identity is gone, you'll be less of a human. and this is where the structural racism comes in. And I mean, they know that. They know that. I think we're trying now to understand that history is crucial. Once you understand the history, you're better off in planning how you go forwards. Something which, I think this film is trying to give us a good hint. So it's very wonderful to hear all the views tonight, because they're all going in the same direction, and hopefully more people will pay attention to the importance of history and the fact that we're dealing with people who design things from the point of view of structural racism. That's how it's working. It's not about dealing with an individual. It's they're looking at the entire collective of Africans. And yes, and I agree with what Ade is saying. It's working for them that way. And that's because we're not scrutinizing it enough.
Yes, it's very, very intentional. Now, Bonny, if I could ask you to run that film for us, and we'll come back to the discussion. Thank you. I've watched it a couple of times. There you go.
The New World. Our nation began not as an idea invented in the minds of men, but as a land discovered. We are a people who never stop building, never stop climbing, never stop dreaming, never stopped striving for greatness. Our nation was forged not by fate, but by the unbreakable will of the citizens who call this land home. With our genius and industry, we built the wonders of the modern world, and our greatest works are yet to come. On a windswept beach in North Carolina, two American brothers prepared to transcend the laws of physics. With a sputtering engine and a handmade craft of canvas and wood, the Wright brothers lifted mankind into the sky. In the clouds above, the world grew smaller, and America grew greater than ever before. But for the United States, the sky has never been the limit. Within 66 years, a single human lifespan. American astronauts broke free from the Earth, stretched their hands through the endless void, and planted the stars and stripes on the face of the moon. America brought mankind into the space age as we took our place among the stars. A new revolution began here at home. Computers born in a Pennsylvania lab opened a new frontier. Americans linked the world with the internet, putting the light of knowledge within reach of all. We pioneered new technologies and new industries, sparking the greatest explosion of prosperity the world had ever seen. Now we stand on the threshold of yet another frontier. Artificial intelligence, robotics, quantum computing. America is once again forging the future.
Yeah, I'm not an American, but I have to tell you that when I watched that, I got goose pimples. I got goose pimples. Zariyi, over to you. In the light of what you've just seen, with 125 years post-creation, and the Americans are marking 250 years. And we see the achievements of fellow men and women like us. What do you say? How does it make you feel?
Well, I would have said I feel shortchanged and all of that. I've asked certain funny questions, actually. I said, somebody said we were underdeveloped by the West. And I asked, what exactly did our own forefathers do then? When, say, a couple of white folks would sail for months, end up on our shores, come in, do whatever. I mean, we were brutal against each other when it came to war. An example is, many people don't know so much about the Middle Belt, but my own tribe, Baju, I sat with someone who told me we had military alliances with another tribe we didn't even share a word together with. That's the Kagoma. They are more related to the people of Stephen, the Ham tribe. And I was so surprised because even as at now, there is a community where you find we didn't really mix so much in terms of marriage, but we have thrived for centuries side by side in that community. You just find us living together with them. So he said it's because we did have military alliances at some point. And I realized we actually had stories, we actually had warriors, we actually had a whole lot that we didn't put together. When I look at the US, to be very honest with you, the sample of the US seems more likely like something that should be failing over hundreds of years, not even Nigeria, because who exactly were they? It wasn't exactly the Red Indians that evolved into that. They were just people who crossed the oceans from Italy, Spain, England, and all of that. And they met with their ambition, with their selfish whatsoever. But at some point, they managed to, forge themselves into something that they wanted to become. In the case of Nigeria, I am so afraid it doesn't sound somehow, but I think when this conversation is going on, frankly speaking, a name keeps popping in my head, and that would be Gideon Oka. I mentioned Gideon Oka. I don't have to go detailed into, whatever it was he proposed at the time. I look at the things happening. When I look at, it's not, I don't see it as a coincidence that a country with over 250 million people, I think one of the wealthiest countries on earth in terms of human and natural resources, is suddenly becoming the epicenter of a clash of two civilizations. There is the strength of Christianity that many would argue that it's basically the one country where you have a certain strong Christian value, whether you look at it from the side of the Catholics, the Anglicans, the Evangelicals, the Pentecostals, and then on the other end, it's suddenly metamorphosing into, the nerve center of Islamism. Okay, it's not a coincidence. I do not think it is a coincidence that in the entirety of Africa, it's basically where those forces are basically clashing. So you are right when you said, I mean, not you, I can't get the name now, when he said the design was made to repeatedly keep failing. Okay, but you just get so educated, you travel around the world, and you want to convince yourself that let's be patient with time, it's going to work. So I feel something is wrong, and I don't want to totally blame the West. I want to bring the blame back home so that you and I will take up the responsibility of doing something that certain other people did in their own land and even felt the need to go out and colonize, others. I remember a statement somebody made, and while it's hurtful to me as an African, I didn't really blame him, because the question was, who on the shore of the African continent would have known there were other Black people in Madagascar? Who would have built a ship to go to Madagascar and know that there are people with the same skin color like ourselves? They found them out, even though we keep saying we've existed long before you came and all of that. So there is a great responsibility on it. And I think from this documentary, I think it's an unpopular vision, but then there's a lot of responsibility on us to bring it to fruition. And many people, even the concept of colonization or the concept of, the statecraft, the international diplomacy, the deep states and all of that, it is basically from conversations like this that they were battered. The difference possibly between them and we is because is that they put in resources to pursue those things as little as they are. Freemasonry, for instance, as tiny as it is a conversation, possibly over coffee with one individual to the other, they've made it global. And I think we have a responsibility to work as a syndicate, risk being referred to as a cult, being, whatever name it comes. But I think it's something that could be brought to bear if it means working or sponsoring people into, the Senate, different political, offices and all over. But I think it's something that would work and would actually make Nigeria what it's meant to be, especially coming together in that, sense of what we are proposing now.
Yeah, thanks for that. I'm going to come back to that, the religious issue, the Christian-Muslim dimension, especially in the light of the recent Trump intervention. I want to come back to that shortly. Just throwing a little historical detail. The Americans, although now people often point to it as an example of what Nigeria could be, i.e., people from all sorts of different nations, all living under one roof and having that sense of identity and purpose, as we saw in that clip. It has to be remembered that the American model was very different. What they did, those ones who arrived on those ships, first of all, for the first 100 years, they were all Englishmen. They weren't even Scots. They were all Englishmen. And they just brought in their workers who were indentured Irishmen and initially indentured Africans before they now imported more Africans by way of the slave trade. And the formula that was used there, which is not available to us, is that our equivalents, the original nations that were America, they were wiped out and genocided along the lines of what you're seeing in Israel at the moment, where nobody was looking. There were no cameras, nothing to report anything, just wipe out. So you start with a blank sheet with one ethnic group, English, one faith, one queen or king, and that was the foundation for the first 100 years before they now opened the doors to allow Spanish and Italians and French to come in. But when those ones were coming in, they were coming in on a controlled basis. Now, Stephen, let's hear from you in the light of, you saw that story of the American miracle. Help us to frame where it leaves you feeling in the light of the 125 years with you so far.
Okay, yeah. Thank you so much. Well, I don't know, but looking at that short clip, two questions were running through my mind. The first one is, are they the same human beings like us back here in Africa or in Nigeria? The second one is, are we ever going to get there? Those are the two questions running through my mind. And, sometimes I've heard people say that, it's because we were colonized. And then also, I've also read in history that many other countries were colonized. Even in Asia, countries like Singapore, Indonesia, they were also colonized. But some of the things we are still grappling with, they are not issues you can even talk about in places like Singapore, for instance, because they've gone past where we are. So I think ours is both self-inflicted injury. Yes, of course, we are still under colonialism because if you have a system where the guy in Paris will call the guy in Aso Rock and tell him that, hey, Benin is about to fall or Benin Republic is about to fall, you go do something, and then the next hour you have our fighter jet flying to Benin Republic. So these are the issues, and I think somehow there's this thing I call mental slavery, where mentally we have been enslaved. So you see a Nigerian, for instance, I was in Gambia 2 years ago. I was in Accra before I moved to the Gambia. And then I interacted with a lot of Ghanaians. And to a large extent, I was trying to compare what I had back home and what I was seeing in Ghana, how the Ghanaians think, how so you could see that there's a difference. So ours, I think somehow, anyway, you said we're going to talk about the religious dimension, but somehow the white man religion, which they brought to us, has really done so much damage to us that even when you are trying to come out of your cocoon, you discover that there's one religion or there's one faith that somehow still is still keeping you. You know, you can't really move with the pace you should. And so, but I don't even think that the religion is the problem. I think it is our old you have Arab countries doing well. Dubai is a Muslim country. They are doing well. You also have countries where you have Christianity, or you could say they are Christians. America will tell you America is a Christian country, for instance. But they are advancing. The clip we just watched from America, they are doing miracles in there. And I can tell you, the guys in the sky, they may not be Christians. They may not be Muslims. The guys Americans put forward to go to the sky, they may not even be practicing any of the major religion we talk about today. So ours is a combination of issues, too many issues. So when you look at the religion, you discover that even the religion we practice, for instance, in the Gambia is about 85% Muslim country. In fact, Yahya Jammeh renamed the country Islamic Republic of the Gambia before he was ousted. But in the Gambia, you don't see the level of extremism you see in northern Nigeria. I lived there for 1 year. I carried my Bible on the street to go to church. I preached to Muslims in the Gambia. So these are some of the issues. But that is an Islamic republic. That is the country where you have 80% of the population, they are Muslims. But I carry my Bible and preach on the street of the Gambia. But I cannot try it in Sokoto or in Katsina. So ours, I don't know, but sometimes I feel maybe we've been bewitched, like the Apostle Paul will write to the church in Ephesians, that who bewitched thee. So I think we've been bewitched, but by who, I don't know. And then sometimes I feel our mind are in some kind of cage. They've caged our mind. So there's a need for that cage to be broken, where an average Nigerian living in Nigeria, and most times when you see Nigerians abroad, for instance, they think differently, they act differently. So I think it also has to do with the environment, this environment we live, this Nigeria that we live. So a whole lot of issues that we need to unpack to be able to begin to make meaningful progress. As far as I'm concerned, like I said earlier, it's not about the leaders, because yes, we have leadership problem in Nigeria. That is true. But as it is today, even if you bring the best president in the world, I don't know who that person is, to Aso Rock, the constitution is even faulty to begin with. So the document that is supposed to guide us, that is supposed to guide us and lead us to the promised land, is even faulty. So there are too many issues. So many issues. I was at an event last 2 weeks, and somebody told me that have Nigerians asked Abdusalam Abubakar where he got the 1999 constitution from? And that was a big question. Who sat down and drafted that constitution? Because as far as I'm concerned, the ethnic nationalities knew nothing about that constitution. And the man, in fact, the man is a former minister of the Federal Republic. He's a historian. He said that Nigerians need to ask Abdusalam Abubakar, now that he's still alive, sir, where did you get that constitution from? So even that document that is supposed to show us the way, that is supposed to guide us and give us a sense of direction, is faulty. So, I mean, then what do you think we can get right? And that is why our educational system is collapsing. history is no longer being taught in schools. And the governors, who are also ethnic nationalities of their respective state, they don't see it as a problem. They don't see it as a problem. So, I mean, I don't know, but sometimes I get overwhelmed thinking about these issues. Like sometimes I just feel, well, there's nothing that can be done. But with this film I saw this evening and the Orange Union project, I believe that if this project is properly propagated, then there's hope. I believe there's hope.
Thank you, Stephen. Thank you. Well, I mean, your comments have invited the intervention of a doctor. You said, are we the same human beings? So who better to turn to than Dr. Gabriel, the surgeon? Gabriel, please answer. Are we really the same human beings? Are we ever going to get there? And Stephen also said that it seems that we've been bewitched. So over to you, Doc.
I think I quite enjoyed listening to Stephen there because I was actually I was actually laughing throughout, and the reason I was laughing is because he's bringing up very important questions, because I'll be honest with you, I've heard all sorts of things. So first of all, yes, it's difficult to compare what, say, the Americans have, achieved in 125 years and what we are trying to achieve in Nigeria. But I mean, clearly nothing to compare. But it's also true that we need to look at why. Why is that the case? And I've already given a hint before. One thing, even though the Americans started as British people, as English people, in terms of, the current American people we know, at one point they had to break away from the British control. They had to sort of, break away from the British establishment. So that's very important to understand. Because sometimes if somebody determines your constitution or determines what you should do or what you shouldn't do, it becomes a serious problem. People may not know that at one point, the Americans were not allowed, the blacksmiths were not allowed to produce certain amount of metal work without the British monarch or the British government, ratifying it. So, it was, so when someone else is determining how far you go, what history you teach, what language you speak, and how you bring up your children, or what weapons you carry, or, you are basically not yourself. Unfortunately, we think we are doing something. Unfortunately, we're not doing anything. We're just, from my observation, we're just victims witnessing our victimhood. There's hardly any decision that has been made, crucial, important decision with regards to Nigeria, that's actually come in from within Nigeria. If you investigate it, you begin to understand that unfortunately we haven't made any decisions ourselves, not yet. It's very sad. Even when you look at the educational system and all of that, we're not really making. I mean, you're going to see people, walking around in their agbada or whatever, attires, calling themselves ministers or, what you call them, permanent secretaries. The truth is, they are hardly making any decisions themselves. So it's very sad. And we're not going to be able to do it as long as we stay in this sort of arrangement that we have now. It's not possible. Now, let's talk about, are we the same humans? Yeah, we are humans. In fact, from the humanity point of view, some of our African people are way better from the humanity point of view compared to the Western people, or the Oyimbo people, as we call them. So what is the problem? Well, the truth is, yes, they have a lot more freedom to make up their minds, do what they have to do, which we don't at the moment, very sadly. Because if you look at the going to the moon thing, which they tout as an achievement, if you investigate, you find out that one of the key figures, actually their top consultant, the person who was leading the program for them to go to the moon, Professor Agba Okore, is, he should be classed as a Nigerian. So you see, I mean, he was the one directing all their programs. And yes, at one point, after the Biafra, he wanted to return back to Nigeria. Of course, they didn't want him to do it. He kept insisting, and the American government wouldn't let him do it. And you can't blame them. When you become a key top asset in a very huge, massive program, they got to watch out where you go and who goes around you, whether the KGB will go near you, or, they have to be careful. For some reason, he insisted to return, which he did in 1975, December. But what you need to know is he died after 2 days of returning.
Mm.
So, and this is we're dealing with, we're not in control of many things. It's unfortunate that we feel we're being told we are in control. We're not. That's something we really need to look at.
Yeah.
You mentioned, where's the Constitution from? I mean, I've got my suspicion where the Constitution is coming from. I know it's had nothing to do with any African. Nothing at all.
It wasn't us, as Shaggy would say.
I mean, my uncle was one of my uncles. He was in charge of the top, what you call the Nigerian intelligence agency. He was the top man. Of course, he was working between Nigerian and British at the same time. And sometimes you get to understand that we're not in charge of anything we're doing. It's very sad. And for us to be in charge, we have to cancel the arrangement. That's the only way we're going to be in charge. Because as long as you stay in this all eggs in one basket thing, they will be in charge. It's very easy. Somebody in Paris can just say, yeah, fly this plane to Benin, and you will do it. You don't have a choice. But then they're going to come and say to multiple different nations, fly, which plane are you going to fly? You're going to have to consult all the other nations first in the Union. But at the moment, you don't have to consult nothing. You just get up and fly the planes. And they know it. This is why they love this structure. But otherwise, we're as good as human as we should be, but we just don't have the opportunity. We're sociopolitically, geopolitically, we're in chains. We are in chains.
Yes. When someone else is determining how far you go, you made a telling point about the Americans and what led to the war of independence against their own people, because their own people back in Britain were stopping them from industrializing. They didn't want a slave plantation economy.
Yeah.
They wanted an industrial economy. So when they wanted to start making iron, laws were passed in Britain criminalizing those activities. that they were required to import anything by way of manufacture and just remain effectively like the Caribbean plantations as a plantation economy. So when others are determining which of your human faculties will be activated, when others are determining what you will learn, they are shaping your curriculum. They are shaping your constitution. Then they are setting the limits upon what you can achieve as a human being. So it's not that we are not the same human beings, we are, but we don't have the same freedom. We don't have true independence. We're still in chains, mental, invisible. The physical ones were obvious, but the modern day ones are invisible. They're systems that create the chains. Did you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, thanks. I find it very difficult to compare, the US to Nigeria. The US, put simply, is a nation because people agreed to become one.
Yeah.
And Nigeria has never agreed to become one. So it's very, very difficult. And I think any scientist or engineer, and I'm sure other disciplines be the same, when you're conducting an experiment, you will have a controlled experiment. And in this controlled experiment, this is where all the variables are put in. And then you have other experiments where you vary those parameters and you see what the outcome is. Nigeria is the controlled experiment. As I said before, it's as an experiment, it's successful. It's designed to fail. And you kind of compare that with Singapore or the US, where certain parameters have been allowed to, by design or by force, have been allowed to reset. You have more degrees of freedom. Nigeria has, as an experiment, has no degree of freedom. And, as I think it was Stephen who said it, no matter who you bring to rule Nigeria, it will fail because the parameters, there's no degree of freedom. No matter what we do as Nigeria, because we can't say Nigeria is a nation, it will fail. That's what it's designed, to do. Now, we've also got to recognize that, as you rightly said, that in order for the experiment in the US to be successful, they had to do certain things. They wipe out the local population, make them subservient, among other atrocities. Even the so-called Germans, Italians, etc., that came in, at one point they had to, America had to determine whether the national language would be English or German, right? And they had to agree how to move forward. So Nigeria has never had that opportunity to have that discussion. We've never agreed to be one. And I can't, I'm sure my parents never agreed to be one, no, not my grandparents, nor anyone else. So it's difficult to make that comparison. Now, if we had in Nigeria where we agreed to be one, and we had, a civic nation a civic nation designed deliberately around a shared political creed, perhaps yes, because you can see that when Nigerians work in a environment where the degrees of freedom are much more, there are more degrees of freedom, we excel. We excel brilliantly. We become mayors. We become all sorts, So it's not Nigerians per se, it's not us as humans. It's just that majority of us, what we see and what we know is we live in this experiment, which is designed to fail. And it's only when we come out of that experiment that we begin to understand that when we look back in. You know, I was in Nigeria recently, and on my way back, had to go through the airport. When I was going in, I was a bit impressed, to be honest, because now we have a resemblance of technology at the airport where you simply scan your passport and get in. By the way, it doesn't work because when I scanned my passport, it said blood image doesn't work, but the gate opened and it let me through. But when you're going out, by the way, you still have to go through this queue and you're checked. And so you ask yourself, I go through a scanner, I'm scanned, my bags is scanned, and I do all of that, I go through. And then I get to the gate to board my plane, and then I'm checked again. So you just got to understand the thought process. Why does an airline think that having gone through all those scanning machines and everything to scan the bags and scan me as a human being, that my bag still needs to be checked, and I have to be checked at the boarding gate? You got, what's their thought process? And if you can understand their thought process and why they do that, you understand that they do believe that we're not human, quite frankly. But they think we don't follow the rules. We create our own rules. We don't understand our rights. We don't question it. We just follow the rules, and we follow the rules blindly because we are so oppressed, deep-brained, if deep-brained is a word, that we just can't think other than I need to get out of here. And that's my view. I just want to get out. I want to go in, do what I need to do, and I want to get out. Now, so I think, I hear, the views that have been expressed, and the lamentation, but people, I think, needs to understand the philosophy behind Nigeria as an entity. It's difficult for me to say nation, but it's a state that's designed to fail. And no matter how many times you repeat the experiment, the result is the same. And what we need to do, for us who have privileged enough to understand what is going on, is to try to convert, preach the gospel to as many people so that they can see. Because when people sit back and actually look inwards, then it's clear to them. It is clear to them that Nigeria is designed to fail. And trying to view Nigeria in terms of, a Singapore, Australia, New Zealand, and all these other nations is really a waste of time, because Nigeria as it is will not produce the same outcome. The outcome it will continuously provide with a heavy centralized government, very tribalistic structure, is always the same. It's not going to change.
We're going to move to solutions and the Orange Union solutions soon. Tim, you'd like to come in on that? On the issues touched on thus far. Are we the same human beings? Are we going to get there? Have we been bewitched, and if so, by who? Where did the Constitution, which is supposed to be the foundation document, where did it come from? Does it matter?
Yeah, I mean, there is, I think most of the points, I'm only going to add to what's been said because it's more or less the same. The short answer is, first of all, we are the same, because the only experiment you can compare for some of us who've lived in some of other countries is that the same. I mean, I always say that take an average Nigerian today, how horrible the education system is, the university degrees, and you take a typical graduate who went through the process to genuinely want to study and tells you the difficulty it takes them to have the first degree. And then they apply for an admission outside Nigeria to do a master's degree program. They have 1 year for their master's. They pay all that money, all incredible conditions. Within 1 year, most of them have to still understand the culture of where they come from. Within that 1 year, they have to understand the style of teaching and mentality. Within that 1 year, they have to begin to see what they spend their first 4 years in the university. They've never seen the physical side of things they're doing. And yet, at the end of 1 year, they don't fail. It's in spite of everything. In fact, some of them gets better. In just in 1 year, you see, I have 1 or 2 people that come in and you look at them, you see the first 3 months, horrible. Part of what they're struggling is being in somewhere else and still to understand how the education system works. And by 12 months, you look at this person, they are excelling in the class. So the question is that we are the same. And even if most of us here who believe that we may have succeeded here, if you go to Nigeria, you will fail. So how come the same person shifting to main systems, even with the difficulties we all have, still have a chance of succeeding? So the short answer that, first of all, that we're the same. Then it brings us to the second question. What is it? And we've touched on it in different shapes and forms. We've identified there is a constitutional issue, there is a systems issue, and sorry, I have to keep quoting you in terms of the word experiment that is design. And some have identified it from a structural point of view, the constitution side of it. There's so many fundamental things that are designed that we're not supposed to be the beneficiary of the country called Nigeria. And we can't kid ourselves about it. Most of us, would like to go to Nigeria because it's our country. You can't beat your country of origin or where you come from. So the short answer is yes. But the other point I think it's very important, which I touched on, because we've got to get to the micro level quickly. And that's the point I was making during our conference, the 140 Years Beyond Berlin conference, where we have to understand how they've managed to do what they're doing to us without physically being a number there. And we're doing it and we blame ourselves. But what we have failed to understand is that they've codified the system that they perfected when they were on the ground. They studied us. By force, you knew what military would do, what machines would do, looked at what makes a system works, codified it, and created institutions. So by the end of the Second World War, they created the World Bank, the IMF, the systems of financial systems, everything codified it. And once they codified it, which is what I called Africa 2.0, they gave us independence. But when you actually look at the software of this independence, what we do, even if you become the president of Nigeria, you will be operating on the so-called the world order. And that world order has been conditioned to make Africa, Nigeria, any part of the world extractive. So you can't function if you're in that part of the world because every oppression has been codified in system. But the opportunity for us now is that codification system works very well when there is orderliness within the controller. Yeah. So when America and Britain and all in unity and in partnership, and they're all together singing from one hymn sheet, they perfect it. And that's why after the Second World War, they perfected, because they were together. And look at what's happened in the last say, 10 years, the war, they're now fighting each other. Things are changing. They're no longer, the coherence is no longer there. Now, that's where unintended consequence of opportunity for Africa to come in. Because what you see is that they're no longer coordinated and they may not be the same. And I think this is where the point of what America is doing now under Donald Trump and who the enemy is, because it's only now some of us are discovering that Donald Trump enemy could well be, I mean, this is only speculation, could well be the empire, Britain. And so anything Britain had been part of could well, by not design, get relieved. So if Britain has been behind Nigeria and America, the current regime is against Britain, anywhere Britain puts their foot looks like it's going to be released. It's not released because they really want to release us, it's because their focus is on a particular enemy that they also feel that's part of the global problem. So what I'm trying to say is that the opportunity of solution could come inadvertently, but the signal is what's happening among themselves. They're not united in Europe. They're not united. The North Atlantic Charter is almost like in tatters. Britain and America relationship is at the worst. Within the Europeans, they're not help. It doesn't work. The China is rising. So when you look at all indicators and you realize that once they are no longer organized, right? That is what I call Africa 3.0 is loading. The central question for us, and this is where the Orange Union Constitution is, that we have to quickly go back and say, well, the opportunity might be here, but what are the tools that we need to begin to organize ourselves? And part of what we're doing today and carrying the message and using this discipleship thing is to begin to say, have we got the right tools while these guys, because it might take them 10 years to organize themselves, but between now and 10 years, if we're not careful as all Africans, Nigerians, and organize ourselves, this is the best opportunity that we could truly organize ourselves and take advantage of what's happening to begin to first understand what went wrong in our time, understand what worked in the past, and understand what we could borrow from what's going on, and immediately quickly construct a solution. And that's where the Orange Union model comes in, that is so fundamental that no matter what, if we don't go back and at least create awareness that the need for an organized constitution that recognizes 371 ethnic nationalities and find a mutual ways to see what we agree and what we disagree and what we can commonly centralize and what we can run, like Switzerland. You have cantons. Nobody knows who the president of Switzerland is. Even people struggle to know what capital of Switzerland, because they operate almost like what we're trying to do in Orange Union. Very organized, their cantons have complete jurisdiction to the decisions that fit their own area. And so together, the force comes together. So yes, the Constitution, Orange Union, but the job is to get the message across, get it to the politicians, get everybody, educate those. Only the willful ignorant will hear this message and not be part of it. And that will be those that design the system, and we know who they are. We know the ethnic groups in Nigeria that don't want the system to change because they feel that it is their entitlement to inherit it and they will not like it. So there is a solution, but more importantly is the external force that we've been complaining. It's in disarray right now. And that window may well be just a 5 years or 10 years window. I don't know. If Donald Trump survives, it will be no more than 2 more years or 3 more years. So there is opportunity, but it's a balancing the external force and then the internal force, what we need to do completely.
Excellent, excellent. Well, that's an excellent segue to Stephen Kefas, Stephen and Zariyi, because we're far away, we Southerners and Broaders, from the location of the recent Trump intervention. People are asking the question, why Sokoto? Perhaps Stephen can enlighten us on that, and allied to that, to what extent is there dialogue like this between the Middle Belt and the North? I always look for, I like to think I'm a friendly person, and I have friends from all over. And once upon a time, we had a Hausa man on Fatherland, but we lost him somewhere along the way. A brilliant guy. We lost him somewhere along the way. We just couldn't really. He couldn't make himself comfortable with the discussions. To what extent are discussions like this? Are there fora between the Middle Belt and the Northerners? If you could deal with those 2 points, Trump's attack on Sokoto, why? What do you see unfolding, and what is the extent of the communication at a civil level between the Middle Belt and the North? Thanks, Stephen.
Thank you. Okay, thank you so much. Why Sokoto? Let me begin with that. In 2024, I did a report for Truth Nigeria. Truth Nigeria, by the way, is an American newspaper. And the report was based on site visit in Sokoto, where I discovered that a new group was emerging, even though it wasn't really new because the group has been around in 2017. But then they left and they have some few members on the ground. But they came back this time around armed with sophisticated weapons. And they were mostly Arabs. They also have members who are Fulanis. They were from Mali, Burkina, Niger, part of Chad, and also Libya. They call themselves La Recrue. La Recrue, I think, is a French word for the recruit. Now, the Hausa people could not pronounce La Recrue, so they Hausanized it to La Kurawa. I'm taking you back how they started. So the Hausa people Hausanized the word to La Kurawa, and of course, the Hausa people are used to doing that. Any word they cannot pronounce, they Hausanize it. Now, Sokoto is the seat of the Caliphate. And the Caliphate, of course, is the headquarters of Islam, the Danfodio version of Islam in Nigeria, and even beyond. Now, the Lakurawas have been a government unto themselves and the people in different local government areas in Sokoto, such as Tangaza, Bindi, and 4 other local governments. Now, they collect taxes. In fact, there's a full implementation of Sharia law, not the Sharia law signed in year 2000. This one is an extreme version of Sharia, where a woman and a man cannot be in the same car. These are some of the doctrines of the Lakurawas. Now, as at July, I made a tweet in July last year, where I warned Nigerians that 2 trailer load of Lakurawa fighters came into Sokoto from the Sahel. Of course, it fell on deaf ears because sometimes you raise this alarm and nothing happened. So, but what I didn't know was that the Americans have been conducting ISRs across the Sahel and part of Sokoto state. So somehow they gather intelligence that, oh, these are fighters. Of course, they are armed, of course. Seeing them, you know they are terrorists. But one fact remains, the Lakurawas are linked to JNIM, the Jenim guys that are wreaking havoc in Mali and Burkina. And of course, they are affiliated to Al-Qaeda, not ISIS. Trump said ISIS, but they're actually Al-Qaeda affiliate. So the strike in Sokoto is significant. Like telling the seat of the country, because you can't tell me that the Sultan, and I don't know if you've noticed that few hours after the strike, the Nigerian Chief of Army Staff visited the Sultan's palace in Sokoto. So there's no way that such a group will be operating in the seat of the Caliphate and the Sultan will not be aware. It's not possible. So that strike was very important. In fact, it was to send a message because the Sultan has been accused by people that, look, he knows what is happening in the country. because he wears 5 hats, the Sultan. He's the chairman of is the supreme leader of the Islamic Affairs Council. He's the JNI chairman. He's also the Sarki Muslimi, that's the Muslim leader in the country. He's also the Sarki Fulani. He had 5 hats that he's wearing. And in these 5 hats, in Islam, he's supposed to be respected. What it means is that if he calls the Fulani guys across the country that are murdering people and say, hey, it's enough, lay down your arms, they have to respect him because he's the Sultan. But he won't do that. I was with Pastor Bosu Emmanuel, a historian, very brilliant man. I think he's in Lagos. And when he started narrating some of these things, he said, look, if the Sultan makes a call today that, look, all the terror guys, groups across the country should lay down their arms because he is the leader of Muslims in the country. Boko Haram may not obey, but the Fulani guys will obey because he is the Fulani leader and he is also the leader of Muslims. But he won't do that. And there are other questions about his when he was in the army, staying in Pakistan and all that. Well, the American, what's his name again? Arnold, has been raising a lot of questions about the Sultan. So the Americans actually got intelligence. In fact, they saw them, satellite images of those terrorists, and then they struck. So I've heard people say that, oh, but in Sokoto, there's no terrorism. That's not true. In Tangaza, I have friends there. There's a journalist who lives in Tangaza. He said the people have been in bondage because apart from having the local government and the state government, you have the Lakurawa government that you have to respect. You have to pay taxes to. You dare not carry a radio. They said radio is haram, that is a product of the West, but they are carrying guns produced by the West. I mean, what an irony or contradiction. So but those are some of the issues. In commercial vehicles, they said the men must sit one side, the women will sit the other side. So many laws, they've come up with in those areas, and those people are living there, and the government is aware. So it's like having a government within another government. That's what's happening there. So yes, in fact, I interviewed some people after the strike. They said they are so happy now that now they can no longer see the Lakurawa fighters because they believe they've been killed. And then, of course, some of them ran away. And now they have peace. So while you have the northern elite, some of them like Sheikh Gumi saying that why should America strike? The direct victims are saying, look, we thank God that the Americans strike. Now we have peace. We are no longer under the bondage of these terrorists. And the question I kept asking that, why do you have fighters from different countries in the Sahel coming into Sokoto? Why Sokoto? Why didn't they go to Niger and form their base there? So it means that the caliphate somehow has been accommodating to these guys. That's what I believe, because if the caliphate has not been accommodating, the caliphate should be the one raising the alarm that, look, we have fighters here from the Sahel and calling on the government to come chase them out, but nobody did. So that strike was significant, and it was also a message to the caliphate that, look, we are seeing you. We are seeing what is happening. And then, of course, the Sultan didn't say anything about the strike, but Tambuwal, the former governor of the state, spoke about it, and the governor also commended the strike. In fact, the governor said they are aware that the strike targeted a base for Lakurawa. So it was a successful strike. There've been debates on the Nigerian media whether terrorists were killed or not. I can tell you, based on my conversation with people on the ground in the community where this strike took place, they said they've not been seeing the terrorists again. So if after missiles were launched and then you can't find the terrorists, it means they've either been killed or they've moved and may never return again. So that, I think I've answered the first question. Then the second one is a channel of conversation or discussion between the Middle Belt and the North. Yes. At the moment, sincerely, I don't think any exist for obvious reasons. Dr. Obadiah Melafia, who was in the Fatherland group but was not very active, by the way, is a Southern Kaduna man, a Nilzon man. Nilzon is one of the ethnic nationalities in Southern Kaduna. He said something in 2021. He said the monolithic knot died with the massacre of innocent women and children in Plateau and different parts of the Middle Belt. So that illusion that 19 northern states no longer exist, because now the people of the Middle Belt now know that, look, these guys don't even have regards for us. The only regard they used to have for us was when it comes to politics, so we can cooperate with them or collaborate with them to make sure a candidate that they believe in becomes the president. And that's what has been happening, especially since 1999. So, but when these mass atrocities began in 2001, which coincided with the 9/11 attack in the US, it became very clear to the people of the Middle Belt that, look, we are not partners with these guys. Because when the militants or the terrorists were busy slaughtering people in the Middle Belt, the core North didn't see it as a problem. In fact, there were never criticisms from the core North or condemnation from the core North. So, at the moment, I don't even think if such channel can exist, because some of the leaders who may have been able to come up and say, hey, let's have this conversation. People like Gowon, for instance. I mean, he can't do so because even his people in Plateau have been slaughtered. So I don't think it's going to be possible in the nearest future for the Middle Belt, and though the governors do it, they go for the so-called Northern Governors Forum, and you have governors from Taraba, Plateau, Nasarawa, Kogi attending, but it's all politics. But the real guys, the real people of the Middle Belt, who are not politicians, who are the direct victims of these mass atrocities or witnesses to these atrocities, I'm telling you, there's no way you bring them under the same umbrella with the guys from, let's say, Zamfara, the Sharia Zamfara, or Katsina or Sokoto State, and say, let's have a conversation. That's unity, that so-called unity that never existed, because you remember in the 50s, the United Middle Belt Forum, and you remember the alliances, how the Middle Belt form alliance with AO, and then you have the Northerners and the Southeasterners forming their own alliance. So I think even before independence, the Middle Belt has always been the Middle Belt. So, and with the recent happenings, I can tell you, I don't see any conversation happening anytime soon, because there's no leader that is as neutral in the sense of it that could say, hey, look, let's have this conversation. None exist, because the guys up north, to them is business, it's politics. And it became very obvious that it is only during election that you begin to hear mantras such as the 19 northern states. Oh, we are one North, or Ariwa, we are one people. But in the last 3-4 years, there's been a reawakening among young people from the Middle Belt, where you have groups such as the Middle Belt Patriot and other groups that are informing the people that, look, we are not one with these people. We have our cultures, we have our identities, we have how we want to live our lives. We want to be able to eat our porks and drink our brukutu, our local gin, and live life. Where the other guys up north feel, look, if you eat pork, you have become unclean. Or if you drink brukutu, you become unclean. So this awareness is ongoing in the Middle Belt. And that is why in the last 3-4 years, it discovered that the word Middle Belt, or the phrase Middle Belt, has become so embedded in the political discussion in Nigeria, whether on Twitter, X, or on Facebook, or on Instagram. So there's a reawakening going on. And with this reawakening, I can tell you, sir, any conversation where you have the Middle Belt, in fact, it will be easier to bring the people of the Middle Belt and the Ijaw people under one umbrella for them to discuss the way forward than to bring people from Katsina or even northern part of Kaduna. That's how bad it is. That's how bad it is.
Thank you so much for that excellent insight. Zariyi, you are the former national coordinator of the Middle Belt Patriots. Anything you'd like to add to what you've heard there, please?
All right. Let me put it this way to the question of why Sokoto. I think I tried addressing that question a couple of days ago on News Central. The question should actually be, why shouldn't it be Sokoto? Other than being, you see, the Lakurawa as a group, I think I called Stephen's attention to it at some point. The group changed its modus operandi and became more obvious as a terrorist organization just about a week after a bill on the National Assembly was kicked out, a bill that was put there since 2021, which was to expand the scope, to generalize the scope of Sharia law, the application of Sharia. And I maybe coincidentally, it happened to be sponsored by, a representative from Sokoto State. Kicked out. Barely a week afterwards, their modus operandi changed. But prior to that time, they have been as dangerous, if not more dangerous, than Boko Haram, especially in other spheres. An example is Central African Republic, Mali, and certain other places. Their flooding of Nigeria came as a result of their failure to overrun Mali and to carve a place for themselves in Central African Republic. They wanted to take advantage of, the rising of the anti-Balaka militia to come in as people who were trying to fight them. Now, the problem we have is they were not just in Sokoto, staying in Sokoto, but they were recruiting people, the locals. There is a report I saw where the locals were asked, people would say, why didn't they attack Zamfara or Kebi and all of that? No, they may be carrying out, for the time being, usually they use kidnappings, they use banditry to sustain themselves. But those are temporary measures. But primarily, Sokoto is more like a depot, the recruitment ground, the ground where they train people. And like I find in that interview, I said, my belief is that whatever it is you find in the Middle Belt, as far as the Fulani Islamist militia are concerned, is being fed by that Sokoto ground. So it's not a place where they make trouble. They don't fight there. They just groom themselves and all of that. So locally, there are more people aware of the Lakurawas and aware of their recruitment because people will tell you they've been approached. So they are not just flooding the country, but they are recruiting from the local population. Okay? So, and I do not think the Americans are ignorant of that. So it's a classic, it's strategic and it's psychological to send a clear message that we are not the types that will wait for you to strike and then we look for the foot soldiers. We come to your base and all of that. Now, with regards to any tendency of having a dialogue or a common ground between the Middle Belt and the Ariwa people, the question is, was there ever a common ground? The answer is no. The answer is no, there has never been. And rightly, as Stephen said, we are more of an example is in Southern Kaduna. Let me give you an example. I can't remember which candidate, but he won. But he or she, I think it should be either Nenadi or La Lenjumala. But that candidate won the Senate seat with about 800,000 votes. Okay, so I'm giving you an idea of how large that voting bloc is in Southern Kaduna. So it does look like we are only good enough to add to the figures of anybody from Ariwa who wants to run for president. But we are not good enough to sit on the table. We are not good enough to represent. An example is if myself or Stephen were to do anything, and I think I told even the Muslim ticket, should somebody like Gatti, who is an indigenous of Plateau State, or somebody like Yahya Bello, who is an indigenous of Kogi State, or another Muslim from Niger State, who is chronically Nupe in nature, was picked as a running mate to Tinubu, they wouldn't have accepted it. Okay, so there is that clear signal. It's a relationship where I'd say some of our fathers, our forefathers, fought against it from the onset because it wasn't a cordial relationship. It was subjugation. You can't emerge as a political entity, befriend these people, and in turn, they would give you political appointments. And it never happened. The colonialists did that, but it didn't happen. So the idea is to have a situation where Ariwa is there, and then the entirety of the middle belt looks like a part of Ariwa. When you look at what they call the North, anything that looks that it's on this side of the river Niger, they refer to it as the North. Somebody created one map, and I told them, I said, at the end of the day, actually, Nigeria doesn't have any part other than the North because it looks as if the North extended to virtually every part of the country. It's only the strips of Lagos and some parts of Southeast that looks like the South. So basically, it's just a political convenience. And while I will not give so much kudos to our present political class, like Stephen said, the young people have snapped out of that lie. An example is, I will not be fooled into thinking, possibly because a group was led by, say, Hakim Baba Ahmed or any other person to pay a visit to Benue or Plateau or Southern Kaduna and say, hey, let's come together and work this. I basically know what it means. When you speak to people like Gawan, they know what that meant. When you speak to the T.Y. Danjumas, they know what that meant. When you speak to the Jerry Ganas, and all of those old politicians who thought something could have been forged out of it, especially on the side of the river Niger. They know very well it didn't go anywhere. Okay? And I think they were less informed than the likes of Gideon Oka. Now, what we basically look at is, and geographically speaking, I've told somebody, he argued with me, and I told him to do his geography. The Middle Belt is a lot closer than the southern part of the country, even geographically speaking. I told someone, I said, on my bicycle, I could hit Jos from southern Kaduna, the capital of Jos, before somebody in a car will leave southern Kaduna to come to the state capital. So there is so much that disconnects culturally, especially as a people. And it's not about hatred, but it's about coming to terms with the fact that however you struggle, say, to love a woman that does not love you, okay? You buy her gifts. If you want to kill people for her sake and all that, her heart is not with you. So accept it and just live peacefully with her. But don't ever think there could ever be a marriage. I think that's just the best. I could, summarize our relationship with them, especially now in the height of this Islamist genocidal massacres. Yes.
Thank you so much for that fabulous insight. Before I call in our Southerners to comment on what they've heard, I want to ask you and Stephen, how much do you know about the Madagascar swap? How the Sokoto, and to use the expression in the treaty, it was Sokoto and all that belongs to Sokoto. That phrase is what's captured the Middle Belt. How much do you know about the deal that was done between the British and the French in the Anglo-French Treaty, 14th of June, 1898? Wow. Because Sokoto was supposed to be part of Niger, and not part of what was to become Nigeria, but it was the colonial secretary, the British colonial secretary, Joseph Chamberlain, who told the French that, yes, according to the principles we agreed in Berlin, you're right, it's supposed to be yours, but you can't have it. And the only way you're going to get it, that is Sokoto, you have to be ready for war. And it was to avert war that on the 14th of June, 1898, that they signed their sub-partition agreement, which resulted in Sokoto being left with the British, released and surrendered by the French, in return for Britain giving Madagascar to France. And that's why when you look at the map of West Africa and you see the ceiling of Ivory Coast, the top of it, Ivory Coast, Benin Republic, Ghana, they are broadly in line. And then you see that jump when you get to Nigeria. It's like a penthouse. That penthouse is the Sharia Strip. And that was the bit that was the subject matter of this territorial swap with Madagascar. I wonder how much, to what extent were you guys aware of that? Are you privy to that?
No, I'm not. I've only read about it passively on an article I saw some years ago, but the article was quite not much, not deep. So, but then I think I've read a bit about it. But this conversation also remind me of another conversation that happened in 2017. Now, some group of herdsmen came to Kagarko, where I come from, and I think they came from Niger or from Mali, and they told our people, the farmers, that the place belongs to them. And these are strange Fulani guys from maybe one of the countries in West Africa. So it led to an argument, and the matter was taken to a local chief. And the local chief agreed that the Fulanis, they own the place. And I was wondering what happened. And recently, there are some of these Fulani terrorists that are attacking communities in the Middle Belt. You hear them telling the people that they owned the place. So I think that's that mindset. They are not learned. They may not have read history in school. They didn't go to school, but somehow they've been told that this place belongs to them. Maybe by virtue of Britain, when they were living, handing over the entity to them.
Yes.
And of course, so even the young Fulani chap, and that's one thing that baffles me. You meet a graduate from the Middle Belt who doesn't even know history, who doesn't even know these things. But you meet a herdsman that has never been to any classroom, but somehow he has been told, maybe by his father or his grandfather, that look, you go to Nigeria, Nigeria belongs to you guys. So, and that is why most of the communities under attack in the Middle Belt today, the whole idea is to chase the indigenous people out of it. And that's why in Plateau State, you see the Fulani say, Plateau belongs to them. So I think this calls for concern that the ethnic nationalities in the Middle Belt, who are even learned, who have gone to school, some of them are even historians, they don't really understand the magnitude of what this problem is. But you have a herdsman who is coming from Mali. In fact, when I was in jail in 2019, I met a Fulani guy who is a Malian. So he was arrested for illegal possession of firearms somewhere in Birningwari in Kaduna State. A Malian. So, and we got gisting, we got talking, and he told me that, well, very soon he will be out and he will return to Mali. I said, are you a Malian? He said, yes, he's a Malian. I said, so what were you doing in Nigeria? He said, Nigeria Namuni. That is in Hausa language. Nigeria is our own too. I was like, really? How can you come from Mali and say that Nigeria is yours? So that mindset is there. This conquest mindset, they believe that is theirs. I don't know what agreement they had with the British guys, but I want to plead that if possible, if there are materials on the Madagascar deal, that some of us could read so that we'll have understanding. Because the minister I met a few weeks ago in Abuja, he told me something. He said, look, if our young population in the Middle Belt will read more and understand history, By the time these guys, the caliphate, understands that, look, the crop of people you have in the Middle Belt now are informed about some of the things that happened maybe in the 19th century or the early 19th century and all that. They will now know that, look, it is game over because these guys now know what the problem is. But many of us don't even know what the problem is. And then you go to libraries, you can't even find some of these articles. They've been removed. In fact, there's a library in Kaduna, I think one of the government-owned library. A friend went there some years ago. He said he couldn't find any article about the Middle Belt. They've been removed. So we have, I don't know, but at Middle Belt Patriot, where Zariyi was national coordinator, we created an online library, which is still existing, where we have some of these articles in the cloud. You know, some of these articles about the Middle Belt, some of these books written about the Middle Belt, some of them written by some of the colonial masters themselves, because some of those books are so important. They explained some of the problems we are having today. So we're able to have a compendium of such books, which is in the cloud, but there are quite few. I think about 30 books or thereabout. But of course, 30 is small compared to the volume of materials that exist about some of these problems we're having today. So, sir, I don't know how you will help us.
I've already done your bidding. I've just messaged you
Thank you so much
on the Madagascar swap because I was discussing this with Tony Iam, Colonel Tony Iam, just the other day. He didn't know about it. You referenced the Orca coup, and it did touch on this very issue of the Madagascar dimension. Now, you see a little detail. This expression "order belongs to Sokoto" was the catch-all phrase that the British were helping the Fulani to make the widest possible claim to territory that wasn't actually there, because bear in mind it was the British versus the French. And so the formula was agreed that Sokoto and all that belongs to Sokoto will come into the British sphere of influence rather than the French. So it was clearly in the interests of the British to encourage the caliphate in Sokoto to make the most extensive claim to territory, even territories that they had no presence in. And so this becomes the roots of the mentality that this was all part of Sokoto Empire, even though it wasn't theirs to begin with. They had the British helping them advance that argument. And so, of course, once the argument has been won in relation to the French, it's difficult to see the caliphate retreating from it. They will simply say, well, we have an agreement, we have an understanding. Somewhere there's some map. I haven't seen it, some map that will have been the basis of this Anglo-French treaty. Zariyi, sorry, you wanted to come in. Go ahead.
Okay, yeah. The whole idea, I think primarily, I sat down with somebody who wanted to claim, and unfortunately he's from the Middle Belt, but I think his knowledge of the history of the region comes from the Caliphate historians, their view of who the people of the Middle Belt are. And basically that was what he kept regurgitating. I said, I don't dispute the fact that you have fed yourself with a certain kind of history, but it's coming from the Caliphate historians. And basically, whatever it is they put forward is that which makes you good. An example is Stephen was, there was a town hall where Stephen made a presentation, but there was another boy who stood up, a Fulani boy on the plateau, that claimed his parents told him that they always occupied the plains of the plateau. And then they went up the mountain and they brought down the Birom, the Ngas, and all of that, and gave them clothes to wear and gave them places to build houses. basically that he stood in front of the people of the plateau and was saying that, and it didn't even come across to him as an insult. And you wondered with the Birom particularly and their population that I always argue is likely equal or thereabout the population of likely the entire Fulanis in Nigeria. How do you basically claim that people like that in their millions just lived on top of the mountains, that you came and brought them down? Where did they come from? So there is a whole lot that we are missing as a people. And, you know, that particular history basically gives credence. Like I said, a lot of the times people tend to, you know, Gideon Oka just looked like maybe some crazy guy that woke up and felt the country looked like a piece of cloth you could use scissors and cut. But his decision came from a deep understanding of history. A kind of history he understood that over the years, over the decades from then, will disallow Nigeria from emerging or having even the faintest semblance of a nation. Because I picture a situation where it would be easy, in the middle belt, while I'm not Tiv, while Stephen is not Jukun, while one person is not. I mean, there is a greater tendency of integrating into each other, appreciating our differences, yet going together as a people, than dealing with a situation where the common denominator between the trouble in virtually every other part of the country is one individual who believes his primary concern is that primitive sense of entitlement, even to frontiers he has never stepped foot in. Because it doesn't really make sense when somebody comes to a forest he has never seen before and tells you it belongs to him. It comes from that history. And basically that was what brought the Lapra. Remember I told you with the Lapras, their aim was to create a home for themselves in Mali. Then they tried African Republic, and I think they tried another country not far somewhere around West Africa, and it didn't work. But by 2015, you would understand where some of the APC chieftains will tell you that some people were told they should come to Nigeria, they would create a home for them. Those were the people that came in. Those were the people that came in. And the only reason they did not walk alongside Boko Haram is because Boko Haram was predominantly personnel by Kanuri. And we don't know them historically to walk alongside each other. And I think that was the conservative nature of Kanuri, whether in terms of their culture or religion, is the reason why Danfodio left that region and basically subdued the Hausa parts and attempted the Middle Belt. And that was what basically based them in Sokoto. And Stephen was mentioning something in passing. The silence of the Sultan is quite loud because he is actually not ignorant of what they were doing in Sokoto and what the entire mission basically is. So it's what the insecurity you find in Nigeria is in pursuit of basically this document, whatever it is was agreed on this document, is in pursuit of that. And most of the time, a lot of our politicians don't have this background. Because somebody like Lalong to just sit down and tell you that even the government house on the plateau is on the cattle route. And I mean, anybody that takes to heart any concept of the cattle route will tell you his history of the Middle Belt does not go beyond the propaganda of Amadou Bello, because basically he batted that lie he fed people with and all of that. So it's my honest hope that the Orange Union may look like a spark between a couple of like-minded people, but I'm hoping maybe we set ourselves a target and make it a national conversation, not just we go beyond. We get it to a point where it's a topic even in the National Assembly and certain other aspects of the government. I see that as the only solution. Otherwise, we will just keep fighting wars and fighting wars and fighting wars, and that's all.
Excellent. Thank you very much. The Southern Trio, you've heard it all now directly. Yeah? Any comments, interventions? You're mute, Adi.
I was trying to unmute myself. Quite a very interesting discussion. I have to say, at some points I had flashpoints of Planets of the Apes. For those who have watched Planets of the Apes, and on one part, I think I spent a couple of years in the north in Maiduguri, so quite familiar with the Canaries. And I'm a little bit, should I say, encouraged by the current agitation I feel coming from the houses against the Fulanis, because I always believe that if there's going to be a fundamental shift in Northern policy, it will come from the houses. It will come from the houses realizing that they are the indigenous people and that they've allowed themselves to be oppressed and ruled by these outsiders. And the moment they realize that and they push back, that may in some way introduce a different output with respect to this Nigerian experiment, because the Fulanese through being the new landlords that the Western powers seems to have given the keys to the country. Didn't just start by trying to capture the whole. They started by capturing the north and the houses, getting rid of the original seven Hausa kingdoms and replacing that with Fulani rule, and then extending that outreach through the whole country. And I think, unfortunately, the likes of the Middle Belt and some other minorities in the north are unfortunate because of the spread of the Fulanese in the north, which allows, this free, filtration of Fulanese from neighboring, West African countries. It's a little bit, similar to what we have in the South, where we have, neighboring southern states coming in. But at least they're not, what I would call, religious fanatics and opponents. People who believe that they need to make Nigeria their home, their home state, and they need to do so by any means necessary. And that's really the Fulanese propagation. Now, in Yoruba, we have a saying, we're laughing one weary. It's quite, the English translation for those who don't understand Yoruba is we cure madness with madness, and at times that's really necessary. One of the there's one of the key I think it's in social what's the discipline where they talk about the ethnic clash in my town, Shagam, between the Yorubas and the Hausas, and it's referenced in the West, and it was a major clash that happened a few years ago, which led to a major massacre of the Northerners in Shagam. Started from a very simple event. We have a traditional event that happens, Oro, and during this time, no woman or is allowed to be outside. And this woman decided, from the north, that she wasn't going to obey. She stayed outside and saw Oro, which led to the inhabitants beating her up. And the Northerners decided to retaliate, and what they did was, in typical fashion, killed a couple of locals. And the rest, they say, is history. The entire northern business empire, the entire northern infrastructure in Chagam was destroyed over a couple of days. A lot of them who were born there left the entire thing and left. Now they're back, but the rules are understood. Hence the Yoruba, we're laughing or we're. I think at times, we've been so oppressed to the point of submission. We just allow events to repeat itself, and we just take it on the chin. And as that continues, they get more emboldened and more powerful until we snap. And if we don't snap, it will just continue. I think there's a West End saying that says, until when your back reaches, the wall and you have nowhere to go, then you have only one or two options. It's you stand and fight, or you surrender, right? And in most people, once they've reached that point, they just fight back. And I think the Hausas haven't reached that point yet, but it's getting there. The Hausas need to realize that the Fulanese is not really looking after their interests. The Fulani is looking after only the Fulani interest. When you look at the north, how many of the governors are actually Hausas? Majority of them are Fulanese. And I think once that realization really triggers and the Hausas fight back and claim what is rightfully theirs, then it might just release the pressure on what is called Nigeria today. May well help the Middle Belt as well. Is getting the Hausas to recognize that they've been taken for a fool for hundreds of years, and they need to wake up. That being said, I think for us in the South, we're extremely lucky because we're so far from the center point in a lot of ways, and a lot of us don't really recognize it. I mean, I was in Nigeria when the airstrikes was taking place, and quite frankly, most people in the South didn't blink. They heard the news, wasn't a big deal. It wasn't even a point of debate. Simply because it's so far away, they don't feel it, they don't see it. I think a day or two before then, there was some kidnapping in Ondo State, which was in the news. But it's that kind of. It's so far removed that for most people in the Southwest, they just don't see it. For God's sake, I was in Nigeria when Anthony Joshua had his accident. He was actually in my town as well, and again, other than the fact that he was, as a well-known figure, an indigenous of the town. For most people, the day goes on. So when people become immune to pain, right? They need to. It's very difficult for them to feel something, and most Nigerians become so immune. I think. Tim was mentioning about Nigerians are able to travel abroad and within a year they excel. That's true. If you've been through the experiment called Nigeria, you become so resilient. You have this survival instinct that when you're let out from it, you're still in war. You're still in war, so you survive, and that's why we excel. Why do I have to work twice as hard as a Caucasian to earn less? Most of us are more qualified, better qualified, but we have to work twice as hard to earn less. And the few of us that actually think we earn big money, when you compare it to Caucasian counterpart, it's really you get disappointed. So. I do feel for the Middle Belt. I think unfortunately their location and everything else doesn't quite help. If it was an incursion in Shagam, as we will say, we're laughing at one way, and it's quite different because you're surrounded by by a whole bunch of sadistic people. The likes of the Sultan, I don't think he cares, quite frankly. He doesn't care.
Well, it's we've got work to do to bring the voice of the Middle Belt to
Yeah.
as we've heard it this evening, to
Mm.
we Southerners who think we we are far away,
Yeah.
because you have to think that it ain't gonna stop there.
Of course.
That's what our people have got to wake up
Yeah.
to react. We've got to get the Orange Union solution in place
All right.
as a fire breaker, as a circuit
Yeah.
breaker. Tim.
Yeah. I think education, education, education. So, and there is something to be said about technology. And it's interesting, Stephen, when you were speaking about what surprises you, how the oral history told by these foreigners, they retain it. And yet, those who went to school didn't have the understanding that these guys that come through and say Nigeria belongs to us, and you're trying to figure out where does that come from? And this is where there are some, I think it was Dele that once said to some, people in Fatherland and said, if you think how Christianity expanded and went global, that the core players in there was Jesus and his 12 disciples. It's only 12 people, and a key player spread this whole gospel that has, got the whole world after many years still talking about it. So there is hope in the sense that I could see listening to, I think I call you, I use your second name, Yusuf and Stephen. I think you guys are already serious disciples in your own way, and you're relatively young. And and what I would say is this: the collaboration that you need is what is happening today, and this must not stop here. The more information that you get, it will help cut the chase, and it will help it in a way because we now have technology as well. And we will be surprised what could happen even just by technology, whether we know it or not, in the next 5 years. And if you think of, I remember years when my children were growing up and they all have to play the games. Then all you have is equipment, but the actual activity that they played was somebody else's culture in the games, like karate and all this. So the people who made the games put in their own culture in it. So an average person, whoever played those games, first of all, already by default known the Chinese and the Japanese culture and martial art. What am I trying to say? This is what technology can make a whole new generation to begin to know. Everybody, the mobile telephone usage in Nigeria is still at growing at phenomenal rate. And I think if we go by the traditional route of distributing information, it will not happen in a lifetime. So I think there's something to be said about the discipleship that you guys are to look at what technology can help to be able to get the information through the system. So there is hope, but to do that, there is what I always try and preach on this concept of unlearn to relearn. And I try to quote this guy, this American futurist, who talks about the illiterates of the 21st century. The illiterates of the 21st century ain't going to be those who can't read or write. It is those who can't unlearn, relearn, or land. So the point is that we've got to know that it is the illiterates, those who, not their degrees, but those who are not capable of just learning. And I'm trying to combine the idea that before you start looking at what's the solution, you guys are already disciples. You got to look at the source of your materials, the source of information. This evening, we talked about the Madagascar story. It's a very valid information that even if just that information get distributed and get known of what the story that it's one step forward. Another part of it is the idea of understanding. There's a famous book, I think Dele, you wrote it. That's one of your the Fatherless book on the way Nigeria missed their road to promised land. Now, it revealed so many things that until that book was written, nobody really understood the deals that went behind the scenes of how we ended up even during the independence time. So these are sort of the source information, and there's so many of them that comes in. On the other side of the equation is also the information that you've already identified in your library. You share it with some of us in the South. And I think from when you look at what we've all said here, the Orange Union information goes into, if you imagine that you're going to be producing this app in the phones, right? Whether it's a local language, you have the Orange Union in the app, you have information, all the things we're talking about in there. When people get hold of their phone, and in 5 years, you'll be surprised how these things, with the AI, can easily be translated, and people will just simply have their phone and all the things that Stephen and you and my brother here, Yusuf, have been talking about could easily get into the hands of hundreds of thousands of people, just making sure that the basic core information about their history, forget about new old school model. It may not work anymore, but you'd be surprised how that's so there is hope. And it is that same message of understanding the Madagascar story, even the Hausa brothers, right? We're not talking about being partners, but let them know their history as well, right? On how they could be part of the Orange Union. Because the idea of Orange Union is know your own history. Know your own history so that you understand what Orange Union is talking to you. Orange Union talks to every individual. And I say, like I always say to Dele, I don't think those of us who believe in Orange Union, we don't have enemies. Because Orange Union contains everybody, because you're not going to come to my space. We're going to look at what I agree with you. So while there may be said we will never get on with these people, no, you're not trying to get on with them. You're trying to help them to understand their own history so that they can leave you alone, because it's part of their own not understanding their own history is part of the problem. We have a saying in Igbo land, "Onye ji mmadụ na ani ji onwe." When you're wrestling and you pin somebody right on the ground there, you're still on the ground. It's like when you pin somebody, both of you are there. So I'm saying there's hope. Technology is there, the material is there. One of the things Fatherland does is what we call information. We're a clearinghouse, right? We really want to take on that clearinghouse job, and we will be happy to relate with yourselves in that way. There are materials out there. We have the corporates. If anybody want to know how the external forces are, just read the corporates. So there are materials, and we can find a way in the future, look at how technology can help us get this information quick enough. With AI now, honestly, in 6 months project, you'd be amazed that we will already have basic information ready for people to know. Let there be debates, on this. So we've got to look at how technology and forget a bit about the old traditional systems, because that is impossible. So that's my penny's worth
Thanks. Thanks.
on that.
Just before I bring Dr. AK in to close us, just a point of clarification from Zariyi and Stephen. I understood you are saying that the difficulty or the dialogue is non-existent between the Middle Belt and the Fulani and the and the Kanuri. I didn't get the sense that it was non-existent with the Hausa indigents. Perhaps you could
Oh,
clarify that.
yeah, yeah. It's actually with the Fulanis,
Okay.
Fulanis especially, yeah.
Okay.
Because recently, in fact, the Hausa, they have this group where this Hajia Khartoum is leading. She invited me to the group 2 years ago, and she told me, she said, look, the Hausas and the people of the Middle Belt are all victims of the Fulani hegemony going on in the north. So yes, there could be conversation between the Hausas and the people of the Middle Belt. Yeah, sure.
Thanks for that clarification.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Gabriel, go ahead.
Yeah, I think I really like that point that there is some sort of breach with the houses. I think it's, and we've touched on that issue of these people are not indigenous. The Fulanese, they're not indigenous. And when you do social engineering, you do look for factors of stakeholdership. Who's going to fit in, who's not going to fit in. And so a disruptor is the one that's not going to fit in most of the time. And clearly, the Fulanese, the British knew they weren't going to fit in. So they had to use them as the disruptor. Because what they want is, and this is the Madagascar swap thing is all about bringing in a people that would, make sure that everybody else follows what you want them to do. If you leave the people alone, they'll do their stuff. But once you bring in these other people inside the mix, then yeah, you've got what you want. The chaos is completed. And so they knew the Fulani element will not fit in. And therefore they push anything they can towards them so they can control as much as possible. And I mean, as you can see, that's what's happening. They lose nothing. So in a glass house, the owner doesn't throw stone, but obviously the person who had nothing to invest in building the glass house will be the one throwing stones, and nothing will progress with them, being in charge. And so everything seems to be working to put them in charge, and that's what the system is all about. But of course, yeah, the way the Orange Union is looking at it is to make sure that only the stakeholders are in charge of their own affairs. So clearly, we're working hard on trying to get the Orange Union message across through big platforms. But I've realized it's also extremely important to pass on the Orange Union message, even in its short form, across family, friends, colleagues, and anybody we feel we can pass the message on to as much as possible. I noticed something recently. I went on it's a TikTok discussion group. There were some Nigerians there, but there were mostly, Ghanaians, Caribbeans, and for the first time they heard about the Orange Union model. And you wouldn't believe, because there's so many people there, they give you your time to talk and all that. And it got to my turn, and obviously, as soon as that topic was clarified to them, they basically, even the moderator, he said, this is too important. And he said, we need you to tell us more and explain it further. I mean, I spent almost 2.5 hours with them. basically the whole thing was taken over with the origin model discussion. And you can see how the people quickly picked up how important it is. And so this sharing word of mouth, you know, about the origin model is really important, because we may not realize how important it is, but it's becoming very crucial. There's a lot of change going on amongst our people. So we need to find this communication breach where we can, you know, link up to all these other indigenous communities and share as much as we can as we push the frontiers on bigger platforms as well, with conferences and, you know, but the discussion really has to go on a regular basis. Anywhere we have the opportunity, we discuss it, we share it. It's making a lot of difference. We are working and getting closer to getting people who we think are, you know, policymakers or whatever. We're getting in touch with a number of them already. But at the end of the day, we need the masses. It's the masses we need. And it's just this word of mouth. So it's really important that we do that. The other thing I was going to say is, I'm quite happy if we can create communication with some other people that we might be connected with to talk about these issues, with any forums that you've got. I'm very happy when I have the chance to join in such forums and discuss as well, because I noticed that people have a lot of questions, and not everybody has done all this research into these issues. I started looking into these issues, especially from 1991, because somebody said something to me that it changed everything. I knew something wasn't right about this Nigeria, whatever. But until that lady said that to me, basically, all she said to me was, she said, the people from your country are from different countries. Because she said, your stipends, which is your sponsorship, is different. You're not like from the same country. So some people from the core north were getting massive stipends, and a lot of people from the south were getting next to nothing. And she noticed, because she is the secretary to the dean of studies, and because the documents come through her desk, and she sees the country, Nigeria, but when she sees the amount for sponsorship, it's different. Now, she couldn't imagine that happening for her, you know, the people of her country. So she was like, wow, you guys are not from the same country. Now, it didn't strike us. We knew it was injustice, but it never, I mean, we never thought about different countryside. You know, we've been so badly burst, so badly miseducated that we couldn't see it. It took a foreigner to say to us, you guys are from a different country. And then we started, but like you say, these people who are non-indigenous, like the Fulanis, they already know that. Because from whenever they came around, that's all they knew. They knew they were different. They knew they had nothing in common. So when we're trying to do, you know, everything, Nigeria, blah, blah, together, blah, they're not interested in that. So we need to face the reality that, yes, we have nations that have been there long enough. That's where we need to focus on, and then find how we're going to work together, which is what the origin, I mean, Tim was mentioning that, but I like saying that one thing that I find more important about the origin is it has no disadvantages, none whatsoever. So it's like what Fela was saying, you've got to be very strange to be the enemy of water. Water has no enemy. as like the Orange Union, it has no enemies.
Yeah, it's a win-win for everybody. Uh, we we've been on for nearly 3.5 hours, so we'll close now. But just the takeaway points. If you want any of us to, or all of us to come and speak on a virtual platform like this to explain further the Orange Union, the Madagascar dimension, or any other aspect of Nigeria's history, because it is knowledge that will set us free. It is the truth that will set us free. And the more that we know about each other's story, the more the sense of community and family that we'll have, such that we'll begin to feel each other's pain. And that shared feeling is what will cascade the solution. But let the conversation continue. There's no audience too small for a conversation about the Orange Union. Absolutely none, because it's an engineering solution. And I always say to people, once the engine is well designed, think how many people a train conveys, and think how many drivers there are. It's only one driver and a good engine. And the Orange Union represents a good engine, and it doesn't need so many drivers, but it will move the country unquestionably. So we depend on each other to information exchange. Part of the colonial strategy was to make sure we don't have access to the books. This was touched on earlier in commentary. The libraries are simply not there. And the libraries would not contain the books that we need. So therefore, those of us lucky to be over here from that perspective, there's no book we can't access. And when we access it, we'll chew it up and package it in order to bring the essentials to those of you who cannot reach it directly. So there's a lot of information on the Fatherland website, particularly the library section. All the information you need about the Orange Union is there. And let's keep the train moving. We've started, and we know it's the solution. We know and we know, as we discuss, that after 125 years, the one Nigerian nation is not in view. It's more remote than ever before. And so the Orange Union is the way forward. And let's continue to push it. I want to thank you all. I want to thank Bonnie behind the scenes for arranging the technology. This conversation will reach many, including those who've got their ears blocked at the moment. They will be forced to listen. Thanks so much, all of you. Thanks so much.